Okay, so really warm welcome to you today for this training session, this webinar on trauma-informed mindfulness. Angie's going to continue letting people in as I begin. And yeah, really lovely to have you and your interest in this. I really feel heartened by it. And as I say, nice to see familiar faces and some lovely new ones too. And this is a topic that I've been working with actually for, and I know it makes me sound quite old, about 40 years, nearly 40 years. I was thinking about it just before I came on. So this isn't new, and I wasn't the first. And yeah, in both my nursing career and my clinical practice, and working with people with trauma is what has really been such a significant part of my working life. It's also been my personal life. So I had a dysfunctional upbringing. It's a good way of putting it. It covers all sorts of things. And I completely understand as I started to meditate in my early 20s as a way of really taking care of myself and trying to create a stronger relationship with myself and what I'd been through in my first 20 odd years of life. Um, it really hit me very early about how triggering longer practices can be. And so I've known that from a personal perspective, and it has absolutely informed my work enormously throughout. And as I say, I've been working specifically with people who suffered trauma, abuse, torture, and very complex medical psychological needs. And yeah, I did that work with a team of psychologists, a psychiatrist for about 6.5 years before I then realized I wanted to go out on my own and set up Mindfulness UK. So I remortgaged my home and bought a property in Taunton and created a mindfulness centre. In 2010, we opened, in fact, it was practically to the day. So 16 years to the day we've been open. And yeah, all that we do is trauma informed so that those of you who've trained with us, it's this trauma-informed way of working is imbued within everything that we do. And I think it's really helpful to be explicit about it as well. It's rather like when we're learning about compassion. Yes, compassion arises from mindfulness, but also it's it's very helpful and important to be able to be explicit about mindfulness practice and compassion practices as well. So I think that that's true of trauma-informed practice, and it helps sometimes just to join the dots. So those who've trained through Mindfulness UK might listen to some of what I'm saying and think, oh yeah, I know that already, but I didn't realize that that was kind of under the umbrella of trauma-informed. So that'll be helpful. So yeah, I'm the CEO, Karen Atkinson, the CEO of Mindfulness UK. And Andrew and I are going to be presenting to you today. And then there's an opportunity towards the end to ask us some questions. So yeah, just giving you a framework of what we're going to be doing and a context within which we'll be talking. So yeah, if Angie can just say hi before I launch in, that would be lovely.
Hello, I'm Angie Ward. For those of you who don't know me, but I think I know a lot of faces on the screen, which is lovely. And yeah, I was lucky enough to have Karen and all her expertise in. She taught me my MBSR many, many moons ago, and I remember finding it very challenging to do longer practices, and the help and support and the kind of explanation that she gave to me about, through inquiry about why I was struggling with some of those longer practices. And I'll never forget how helpful it was, and also how much I use that information and that kind of trauma informed approach in order to support other people that I'm teaching and weave it into my teacher training as well. So I just wanted to say that I feel very fortunate that I had such a well-informed teacher.
Oh, thanks, Angie. So, yeah, a good place to start is with the definition and explaining what trauma is. so that we have a really clear sense of what it is that we're working with. And then Angie and I are going to take it in turns, looking at various aspects of, as mindfulness teachers, which my assumption is that you all are, of how we need to pay attention to this whilst we're teaching in various different ways. So, a definition is trauma is an emotional or physical response to harmful or life-threatening events or circumstances with enduring negative effects on mental and physical well-being. And my sense is that we have now, through as a result of the pandemic, been exposed to more trauma than we were before. And for some, that's really triggered previous traumas. And for others, it's brought new ones potentially. So I was actually asking ChatGPT about this a couple of days ago when I was preparing for this talk. And there are sort of various different figures banded about. But I read that that trauma has really increased by about various different sources are saying between 5 to 10% of us experience more trauma now than pre-pandemic, and a proportion of that is PTSD. And for me, the work that I've been doing, trauma shows up in a lot of different ways, in that it comes about in a lot of different ways. And it's not one singular event necessarily, which a lot of people do sometimes attribute to trauma. And well, I had a traumatic experience, and now I have a trauma response. I feel triggered or I feel activated. There's something for me about the word triggered that I don't particularly like. I feel the activation more than a trigger. Anyhow, that's kind of an aside. And so for yes, for some, it's one particular event. For others, it can be an accumulation of events that lead to a dysregulated nervous system. And that's what we're talking about, is how our nervous systems are designed to be regulated, but we can either be born sometimes with a dysregulated nervous system because we've taken on trauma whilst in utero, or we can develop that quite early on, and we don't necessarily develop the skills to be regulated. And so that can happen in childhood, or we can have a traumatic event in adulthood where our body goes into shock, and we need to learn ways of processing this shock. And so, obviously, what we're going to be talking about today and the work that I do and what drives me in my work is how incredibly important mindfulness and compassion has been to me in my life, in my personal life, as well as my professional world. And I could have actually taught many different therapies, and I have done in the past, but mindfulness and compassion have opened the doors for me, and I can see how they do for other people too. So we're working with a dysregulated nervous system, which hasn't got the sort of capacity necessarily, or the knowledge maybe, if it was dysregulated from early childhood, of how to actually process this information that's come in. The body is in shock. And this can show up in a lot of different ways. As we know, the stress response can have mental, psychological implications. It can show up in the body in numerous ways, in the gut, in the heart, and so on. And I've actually worked with people who've been so traumatized emotionally, not through anything physical that's happened to them, that they actually become either housebound or bedbound because the emotional traumatic event or the accumulated event has been so incredibly shocking to the system that they can no longer move. And the only things that I ever taught, and often I was the sole therapist working with those patients, was mindfulness and compassion. And I've absolutely got people out of their beds, out into their homes, onto bicycles, back into society. Takes a few years, but it can be done. So for those of you who know about the stress performance curve, um, right at the very bottom of the curve where some people are in that really very strong red zone, it is possible to get them back up into a healthy space. And I myself have experienced this too in in a way that is gentle, calm, and soothing. So, where does that leave us with thinking about why it matters in meditation, which is what really essentially it is that we're teaching? And the reason is if we have a dysregulated nervous system, then we are asking people to turn towards that. We're inviting them to tune into that dysregulation, which has served them well. The protection mechanisms of wanting to run away or wanting to shut down are actually really strong defense mechanisms which may have served them well in the past, but are no longer maybe effective now because the trauma it has passed perhaps decades ago, and maybe it's been so well locked away that actually people have no conscious awareness that it's there. And when we're inviting people to say go into a body scan practice for half an hour, it's starting to peel away those defense mechanisms, and the trauma response within the body or the mind can come back to the fore unbidden. That for some, as I say, we don't know it's there. And so these longer practices can actually be, for me, sometimes in my experience of teaching, can be detrimental. They can be re-traumatizing because early on in courses, often we're in the body scan practice, for instance, and the first class, first session of the MBSR is a body scan. So it's a difficult space for people to be in. And so that's why titrating the dose, as I talk about quite a lot, is an important aspect. So the common signs of people in a meditation, when we're teaching a meditation, mindfulness, compassion, whether it's in a group or one-to-one, well, there are several signs, but hyper arousal. So we might see that people exhibiting signs of panic, and that can show up in the breathing, their pallor. Even if we're teaching online, you can see quite a lot if you're attuned to it. We can really see quite a lot around how people are behaving. If they're fidgeting around, not looking at the screen, or they've got like a fidgety thing going on, they're on off all the time of the screen, then yeah, there's something going on there. They might be experiencing physiological responses of a tight chest, or if you're in a room with them, you might see that their foot's jiggling up and down. There's that sort of hyper arousal that's going on. Equal and opposite to that is the hypoarousal, which is where people can go into complete shutdown. Um, they can be really withdrawn, very, very quiet, not participate in inquiry, have eyes down, very sort of closed body language, maybe look at you quite blankly. And so if you consider the meditation line, some people are kind of in that very activated state up above the meditation line, and some people in that very it's beyond dull. It's kind of very shut down place. So we're looking out as mindfulness teachers for both of those, the hyper and the hypo. There's also the disassociation where people can become spaced out. And I don't know if any of you have experienced it. I certainly have with my patients and participants, where very occasionally people might say something like, I was imagining that I was up above myself looking down, or I just didn't feel present at all. And I didn't feel myself. I wasn't able to sense, I was numb, totally numb. Sometimes that might be disassociation. So we need to consider whether that is or it isn't. But yeah, it can sometimes be. So yeah, you can watch the body being very distressed, agitated, changing pallor, blood pressure going up. So sometimes people go very pale or they can go very red. And there's a relational sensitivity that can sometimes come to the fore, where people's breathing changes. Sometimes if you're in a room and you may be going to adjust people's posture or something, you can see that as you're coming towards somebody, their breathing might speed up a little bit. that's a relational sensitivity. They're going to be looked at, they're going to be adjusted. So we need to really consider that as a mindfulness teacher if you're in a space and you're going to be doing any of that, and make sure that you really explain that to people before you go and start, giving them a pillow or whatever. Um, yeah, there's also something occasionally, and I think I've probably had it once that I can think about, is a response to the teacher being in a place of authority, and a participant sometimes brings sort of trauma from their past, say at school, in relationship with the teacher. They might have had a very, very difficult relationship with the teacher, and there's an authority difficulty. And I have had it once, and it shocked me that I was writing something up on a board, and it was a gentleman stood up, came towards me. I didn't know what was going on, and he took the pen off me without asking and just started writing something else on the board as an add-on to what I was saying. And that for me was a real indication that he had something that he was hyper aroused about, and that there was an authority thing going on. And of course, I had a conversation with him about that afterwards. But it's useful to know these things, because instead of getting annoyed and saying, "What do you think you're doing?" there's a sense for me about this is very trauma provoked. They've obviously got a trauma background, and indeed he did. So yeah, they're just some of the things that you might observe or might experience as a mindfulness teacher, and yeah, to take into consideration whether we're teaching online or in a venue. So yeah, over to Angie.
Thanks, Karen. So we often get asked, what are the principles of teaching in a trauma-informed, compassionate way? So in terms of trauma-informed principles, it's about creating a really safe space, whether that's online or in a room for people, which is why we do our those who've learnt with us, we do like a conscious community, which is, how are we going to be? What do we need as a group to feel safe and connected? So that's something that's really important, and that's something that we can come back to, and we can gently kind of explain things like Karen was talking about. Maybe if we were in a physical space, we might come around and just adjust your posture or something like that. Or if you fall asleep, we may, if it's okay, we may come and tap you very lightly on the shoulder, so that people know what's going to happen. They get a space to ask, or what would happen if, so there's no surprises. And also, to the other thing around safety is to provide a really safe structure for meditation or for the class, so the information going out is very trauma informed. This is what we suggest you bring. This is what we suggest that you wear. This is it's all invitational, and to make yourself really comfortable in whatever way you need. Some people don't consider a quiet space that they might need whilst they're attending a session. So I know I'm known as Captain Obvious in the team. I often call myself that, but I've got a good eye for detail because of those trauma-informed principles. So I will look at a welcome letter and build in all of those things that I know are really essential through what we do to make people consider what they need. So it's not just such a big ask of, right, you've arrived, right, what do you need to feel safe and connected? They've already kind of had that, they've had an initial assessment, they've had a form with very carefully formed um, questions, just gently asking them about their lives, and so that we can reach out to them and have a conversation with them. So there's a kind of no surprises, but also in the way that we teach, we stick to time. Throughout the session, we're going to be together for 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever. We stick to that as carefully as possible. When we're teaching a practice, we're saying this is a 6-minute practice. These are the choices that you've got. You can sit, you can stand, you can have your eyes open or gaze softly down. We give people the tools when we teach any practice of like, if things become too uncomfortable for you, this is what you can do. You can open your eyes, you can look around. So they have real choice and agency. Um, and they can opt out at any time, and there's not a judgment there. So often I talk to people I'm teaching mindfulness and compassion to and say it's really strange thing to teach because there's no end goal. It's literally notice what you notice. There's no rules about the way that you sit. There's no rules about the way you breathe. Any rules that people sort of bring are often questioned in that sort of conscious community. People will ask, "Oh, do I have to lay down, or do I have to sit cross-legged, or you know, something like that." Meet that person. Um, yeah, so it's also what Karen talked about in terms of titration, those doses. So knowing that there's a pattern of like we're going to settle, I'm going to give you space, I'm going to give you some information about posture, and then I'm going to invite you to explore, inner attention. But I'm also going to remind you to come back if your mind's wandered, or to ground. Um, all sorts of things like that. So there's a pattern that people can learn and trust in the way that we teach. And I often say in teacher training, don't be afraid of repetition. Sometimes as teachers, we try and be like really clever and like, oh, I use that word so much, I'll use a different word. And I said, don't let go of that, because what's that about for you? Because repetition and kind of there's safety in understanding that every time I end a practice, I'm going to invite you with your next breath outwards to drop your chin down. And then, oh, we're coming to the end of the practice. There's safety in that. But there's also agency because people can have choices. We give people time to come back at the end of the practice. And we really do give them time. I've been on retreat where people say, there's so much time. And then the next second, right, if you could all come back and stand up, we're going to do, we're going to do a bit of yoga now. And I'm thinking, oh, hang on, I haven't had, you told me I've got time and I don't. And that can put me in a bit of a spin. And I know, through speaking to other people that can happen. So, being really clear and if there is time that they can take to stretch, to move, to have a drink, to have a comfort break, then that's great. But if there isn't, not to tell people there is. So it's really clear there's no surprises. So, because that builds trust and transparency, but also, like Karen said, telling them because of your years of experience of um, you know, making sure that people can stay in the posture that they've chosen, or you can see that they're uncomfortable, and you can see maybe just advising them to pop something underneath their knees will give them a different experience, and explaining that you're doing that in a really kind, compassionate way, not because they're doing it wrong. Um, that builds that trust and transparency. And, that cultural humility, so safety and threat are shaped by lived experience and context. So really understanding who you're teaching, um, and, that safer community, that what do we need to feel safe and connected, gives people an opportunity maybe to tell you something that they need that you haven't come across before, or something like that. So they can pop it in chat just to you, and you may or may not know that about their culture or about something that's happened to them. And it's not inviting disclosure by therapy. It's just like, I find it easier to, lots of people that I teach are neurodiverse, for instance, and one of the things that helps is sometimes helpful with them is for you to let them in first and the room to fill up with them in it. And that's something, that we might do, we might discuss after an initial assessment. So something like that. But you've got to remember that to help that person feel really safe and connected, because that's what they need. So you've got to remember that each session. Um, but it's so important. And then the compassion principles are relating to sort of how we hold that practice. So, putting your stuff aside as a mindfulness teacher, really important, even though we might be like swans sometimes when we arrive to teach, just giving yourself that time and space and leaning into your own practice so that you are grounded and you are able to be present, and you're able to deliver with a friendly, kind, invitational tone. So you're inviting rather than you're not inviting people to push through anything, to really experience what is there for them and take care of themselves and be kind. And the part of the compassionate inquiry is, that validation. That makes sense. Those sorts of language, or, tell me more about that. There's no judgment when we are holding space for compassionate mindful inquiry. We're not saying, oh, great. We're not judging, bringing any judgment. We're just listening to what they're saying, sometimes reflecting it back, creating space around it, supporting them to make sense of it within their own lives. Um, yeah, so and saying about common humanity, that's mindfulness. Many people experience that. I hear that a lot. So really reassuring and encouraging that, it's the wisdom in being kind to oneself when your practice will sort of carry them through and enable them to pace. And lots of people have come with some preconceived idea and some myths around mindfulness and what mindfulness and compassion is. And so part of the inquiry, particularly at the beginning of course, is, unpacking that for people. Lots of people feel that, or, that's the mindful bit, the bit where you noticed your mind wandering off and bringing it back so that you're really, there's no shaming or, no moralizing. It's all very usual. That's what our minds do. And sharing something of yourself, like Karen has, really powerful. I know I had that experience when I was doing body scan or something like that. So they really feel that common humanity and they haven't got you up there as I'm the mindfulness teacher and know everything. And yeah, we're all in this together. That kind of sense of that is so important. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Karen for the next bit.
So yeah, and she's sort of touched on it a little bit. For me, there's a phrase about feeling safe and sound, and I want people to feel safe and sound from the very first touch point with Mindfulness UK or with one of us, however that is, and whether it's people phoning up, what they see on our socials, whatever is on our website, and so on, just to help people to feel a little bit of a connection and feel the warmth coming from us. And so a part of the process to enable people to feel safe and sound once they actually start engaging with us with teaching or training, it starts well beforehand. So there's some comms, the communications that we have and everything is really set up with this in mind. It's very, very important. And within a classroom setting, what do we do within a practice? And again, Angie has said a few things, but I'm just going to go through several. Is that often if there's a dysregulation within the nervous system, starting internally is too much. It's just too activating. So perhaps starting with anchors that are more peripheral, and it might be way peripheral, like what's the most distant sound that you can hear, and that really helps to be able to start to assess how people are, but it's external. It feels like although the sense doors are open, it's external, and slowly bringing the awareness of sound in towards the body. And then if it feels comfortable, again, invitational, you can start to listen to the sounds of the body. Another anchor, a choice of anchor, choices are so important. The contact points, the floor, the grounding practices, feeling the hands in a position, maybe they're touching the thighs or feeling the sensations of the hands on the floor. So there's an instruction and an invitation around maintain an awareness of being grounded. A visual orientation that Angie's mentioned, about a soft gaze, noticing colours and shapes, and gentle movement. So sometimes with activation, there is movement of the body, and not not giving an instruction about you have to be still. Saying if the body starts to move, then that's how the body is, and if movement feels like it's useful, then please make a choice as to how you move. Also, offering external objects. And in our Compassionate Mindful Resilience program, there's an object practice so that you can pick up a pencil, say, and do a practice with that. So there's something to feel and to engage with rather than doing that inward looking all the time. There are some aspects of practice that I'm sort of a little cautionary around, except for, of course, it's very different for, it's different for everybody. We're all individuals, we're all unique. So perhaps being aware of when you talk about the breath, and obviously that if we're suffering with anxiety or panic attacks, the breath can be quite activated, and by focusing on that, it can release more adrenaline, more cortisol, and take us up a little more heightened into hyperarousal state. So it might be that talking about feeling the breath on the nostrils, or even externalizing it and having an awareness of the air around, might be quite useful, or just offering another choice of object to rest attention on. The long body scans, I feel like I've mentioned, and I am going to say it again because I have experienced it with my patients and clients and so on several times, is that a long body scan can be re-traumatizing. If you haven't had a trauma in the past, it's a beautifully relaxing, gentle practice. It's not for everybody. And so really, really stepping into the shoes of somebody, if possible, that has that activation. And equally extended silences. So you will know from our training together, if you've been, is that I encourage people, teachers, to talk a little bit more at the beginning. So there's more guidance in the body scan, there's more guidance in the mindful movement. And then as we move towards an end of a course, as people have settled, there's that trust has built up, starting to offer more silences can be very therapeutic, but not go straight into lots of silences necessarily. And also be really aware of using strong imagery. What might be a beautiful image for you may well be a difficult image for somebody else. Even the ebb and flow of a wave on the water's edge. If somebody has struggled in the sea and is traumatized by that, that is not necessarily a wonderful image to bring in. So again, um, really careful about what we bring in and offer those choices. I've got a few phrases here that I hear people say a lot: go deep inside, melt, or surrender. All of those things can be tricky. So important to do the assessment, to really know people, to not be afraid of having conversations, uh, maybe outside the class, to keep observing. The assessment isn't only before you start teaching, it's during the whole of the teaching, and to be really alert to when actually it's good just to let go and let them process. I really remember when I was working with a consultant psychologist and saying, oh, this person gets so distressed, and I don't want them to get distressed. And she just says, great, you're doing a really good job that they're getting so distressed, because they're actually touching into their difficulties. And I know that you will support them in that, which I do, and I did. So we're inviting them to touch into difficulties, but we're not wanting them to go into overwhelm. So there's a real difference between challenge and overwhelm. So the challenge is a place of growth and development, and we can hold that. Overwhelm is too much and can be re-traumatizing. So yeah, offering choices, saying, I use the words of perhaps, maybe, if that's available to you. All of these softer phrases that gives people an opportunity to be able to choose whether they go there or they don't go there. They have alternatives. They know that there's no expectation that they have to do exactly what the teacher says. Angie.
Thank you. Yeah. So we're often asked, what's the best way, what's the best format for this? And so, yeah, as teachers, we like a bit of structure. And so do our students or clients. So, before you teach any practice, just really important to check in, even if you think that they know this, we're going to do a grounding practice, or we're going to do a lounging practice. Say what the name of the practice is, what's the length of the practice, what they can expect. We're going to be focusing in on the body scan. Are going to be inviting you to pay attention to parts of your body and what to do if that becomes uncomfortable, and that there's options and choice. And so we talk about um, people being in the driving seat of their own practice, and them having the expertise in their own body, and to trust that they will know what to do, and but giving them those choices and options, to open the eyes, to look around, to maybe move if that feels more supportive, or maybe they've anchored to in their object, and the texture and colour is really important to them. So they might want to open their eyes and just feel into something, or do a little bit of movement or self-soothing, to give them permission. And we talk about permission, and lots of people feed back, oh gosh, it just gave me permission to do what I needed to do. And so it's so important that it's invitational and that we stick to it. A lot of teachers that I supervise, when they're first teaching, will say, oh, I was teaching practice and it was going really well, so I taught it for another 10 minutes or so, and it went really well. And I'm like, I'm very gentle with people, but I'm thinking, no, if you say it's going to be 6 minutes, it needs to be 6 minutes, because it's building that trust, and helping people to feel really, yeah, really safe and secure, like we talked about at the beginning. And also to normalize, to make it usual for people to opt out. So, you don't sort of, shine a light on somebody, but sometimes I take ownership of that and say, sometimes movements that are offered, for me, I don't feel safe to do that. I don't want to do that in a crowd or in a room. So, I go to my go-to movement, which is often, just kind of very soothing, moving in a soothing way. And so, um, get used to not looking around the room and seeing people do different things. Let go of what other people are doing, and to focus in on your own experience and what you need. And to give examples of that really gives people permission. Also, a real light touch. It's invitational, light, gentle, and warm. There's a sense of, we're going to focus in maybe on the breath in the belly, like for a few minutes, until you hear my voice again. And if there is going to be silence, as Karen mentioned, you know, let them know that silence is coming, either at the beginning, and sometimes in the middle of a practice. I say, you know, and I'm just going to be quiet for a while, and I just invite you to focus on XYZ until you hear my voice again, as best you can. So they know that that's coming. And one person I worked with was really concerned with that silence, with what I was doing, and didn't know that she could. I said, well, how about if you open your eyes and just look, you can look around and see what I'm doing. She said, oh, I didn't know I could do that. And then she was worried that I would be looking at her, and got quite, over analytical about that. So, I do sometimes say to people, I might be sat, and if I'm looking at you, I'm just checking. I'm a caring person. I'm just checking that you're all okay. But you're not going to open your eyes and find me looking right at you, or I'm not going to move from this spot. And so that relational distance between, in a physical space, is really important to people, that you let them know what's happening, particularly if they, have had some trauma in their life and they've shared that with you. That often comes up. So the patterns of you, the way that you teach, are titration patterns. So, letting them know we're going to go, we're going to focus on that part of your body, and then it's going to shift. So they know that there's a flow, and they can make a decision. Oh, this feels a bit uncomfortable. Let's just see how long we're here for. And they make informed choices themselves, for example. Um, yeah, and so, really widening people's attention, and talking about attention like a torchlight can be really helpful. We're going to widen that attention to the whole of our body, and then we're going to narrow that attention to different parts of your body. So, and that inquiry, that compassionate inquiry, you're never inviting, personal trauma. disclosure. That's completely different if you're teaching a group of people. That's not what the inquiry is around. And that's why we're really careful. And Karen does a masterclass of inquiry and how to sort of handle those sorts of situations where people are telling you a little bit more and you have a sense that they're tipping into something else, or how you can gently um, hold that space for them, um, whilst validating their vulnerability, um, and just teaching them how to take these really useful practices on into their lives. So, and part of that is the language, and I'm going to hand over to Karen, who's going to talk a bit more about the language.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, just an example, instead of in our Compassionate Mindful Resilience program, instead of doing that torch beam idea of wide and narrow, which does invite people to obviously consider various parts of their body specifically, I talk about ripples. So, ripple of awareness, taking in the body and being compassionate around that. So, language is very, very important. When people are in practice, their sense doors are open, listening to you, sensing into what's going on, and they're in a place of vulnerability as well. And so we don't want to use any sort of coercive language. So I know that you know that a pet hate of mine is the word relax. When I'm assessing people, I talk about that quite a bit. And an alternative is see if you can soften a little if that's available to you. So it's a nicer way of sort of saying you must relax and stay with it. Instead of saying that, just being with the experience as long as it feels manageable for you. Let it go is something to avoid for some in some contexts. You might allow this to be here just for the few moments where your attention is resting. Close your eyes. We've talked about that. And I sometimes say whichever feels safer. Have your eyes open or closed, whichever feels safer. Or go inside is again a very direct instruction. So I say you can notice what's inside or stay with the sounds in the room or whatever feels valuable to you. And the word surrender I mentioned before, perhaps saying something more like, let's find our steadiness and support with our connection with the earth and feel the support that the earth is giving you. So yeah, there's a lot of nuances, and I actually talk about it in my first book, about the language. There's a piece in there, and in my second book I mention it too. So yeah, just having a calm, warm, and spacious tone with less intensity and more flow and openness and choice. Angie.
Thank you. Oh, so important, that language, isn't it? So as well, when we shift into compassion, before we teach any compassion, as you'll know from Karen's model, we always teach mindfulness first so that people can feel safe, that they've got some tools and some strategies and some practice to lean into, and they have an understanding of what their own patterns are. Because teaching compassion can be so deeply supportive and transformational, but it can also be, yeah, really challenging, really new and challenging to people. So it's about teaching it with in a way that there are multiple routes for people to consider what compassion is to them. So it could be, your route in could be, around having compassion for a supportive figure in their lives, or it could even be, and that could be real, it could be imagined, it could be a group of people, a mentor, a teacher, somebody that they hold in high regard, or somebody, a being that's really supportive. It could be a pet. And sometimes that's a really good route way in for people to sort of feel that compassion for another person. And it could be compassion for the body. So, thinking about our hands and what our hands do for us and making sure that we're working in an inclusive way, the best we know about that, the people that we're teaching their body, like Karen used the words, if that's available to you, so hands and warmth and those contact points. So just seeking into that. What's the physical experience of that, of the hands, and what does it feel like when we, touch our hands together and we kind of give gratitude for what's here, or how our hands soften and soothe our experience and all the different things that we do with them. That might be a way in. Or to think about compassion as value. So we were talking this morning about the importance of core values and how we in the CMR course we're linking the kind of core values to practice, to how people, the qualities and skills that we value in other people, and the qualities and skills that we've got for ourselves, and how we are choosing to live our lives in like a more congruent way with our core values, helps us, reduce stress and be more compassionate to ourselves and have purpose. And that feels easier. Purpose being, just my purpose in life. One of my core values is to be kind to others, and that's okay. And so I'm practicing that every day, and to create a space for people to talk about that, for care, respect, non-harm, other than emotions, because sometimes people don't have the language for emotions. And that's something else that we teach in the CMR. We teach the language of emotion and how limited they are in terms of, when Brené Brown researched it, three emotions that people kind of felt very comfortable and vocal about. And, what else is there? What else is going on? So linking those things can be a really good route way into people having a bit of understanding about compassion, and also that common humanity, that concept of we're all in this together. And sometimes people find that so useful to be reminded about in terms of compassion, because, we can be like, oh gosh, that's going on for me. Oh, and everyone else. It makes people kind of look outwards and feel less alone and less vulnerable. I'm not alone in this. So when we go to choose compassion phrases with people, and in the CMR we get people to, to explore and write their own, but we have to offer something in order for them to kind of understand what we're meaning. And so we might say, and they're always non-demanding, something like invitational, like may I be safe. And if may I is activating because it's asking for permission, going back to what Karen said about the kind of authority or something like that, people can get into, why have I got to ask for this? We might just say, be safe, be at ease, may I give myself what I need. Sometimes we talk about open, can we be open? May I be open to the possibility or the potential that I can meet what's here with kindness, because it's too much sometimes to say that people can't reach it. So starting off with those really gentle, non-demanding, or just for now, may this what I'm experiencing be manageable. That's a self-compassion, and always giving people choices. So we might invite or offer a phrase, but it might not work for them. And so encouraging them to find in their own, or just simply feel the warmth in their hands, or return to the sounds and all those anchor points that Karen was talking about. And, instead of saying, can you send love to yourself, we might talk about warm wishes or friendliness. Can we see if a small gesture of friendliness is possible, whether that's to another person or to ourselves, rather than going straight into we're going to send loving kindness to self. So there's lots of different route ways in to be considered. And in the CMR course that Karen's written, there's a real build to that, so that everything kind of dovetails together, and each activity is building as a route way for people to understand a little more with each activity about what compassion is and how they can embed it into their lives. So yeah, there's lots of route ways in. We can't just have one, because if it's one is the one that we offer is kind of the no, people have got a lot of resistance to compassion, particularly for themselves. So it's important to kind of have a toolkit of lots of different route ways in. Really useful. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. So as we start to sort of draw this to a close, to give you a chance to be able to ask us some questions, there's something for me just about, we've mentioned quite a few things about what to do when people get activated, how to set up your safe and sound space. And the language that you use, making sure that people have their anchor points, pressing down perhaps into the floor, rather than just feeling the feet there, noticing a couple of things that you can see or hear if people become activated. Of course, with the initial assessment, as part of that, we invite people to say, we talk about how you can get activated as part of this program. What would you like us to do? So we're really aware of what they prefer, and most people want to just look after themselves and know and either know how to do that, or we can give them some instructions about to doing that. We can also offer a pause moment within the class. Open the eyes we've talked about, and yeah, just asking them to find their own resources. So if you're teaching online, what have you got around you that can be a resource for you? What would be helpful? What are you going to do now to look after yourself more fully once we finish this session? So, and even drinking some water is very grounding. And within the inquiry sessions as well, perhaps asking things about what are your resources? What can you do to feel steadier? How can you be kinder to yourself within this practice and beyond? So we're not a therapist. We're not trying to uncover the past. We're not trying to um, pick around in what happened within the trauma. It's about coming into the here and now and really supporting them in looking after themselves as best we possibly can. So Angie's just going to finish off, and then there's an opportunity to ask questions.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So we touched on this and just want to talk about teacher self-care because as we, co-regulation and you modeling mindfulness and compassion, modeling your, saying, oh, I'm going to have a drink now. I think, I'm ready for a comfort break now, or I feel like I would like to move, so I'm just going to do a bit of movement. Join me if you would like to. But often, tracking your own nervous system, understanding when you're activated, it's not easy holding a space for people, especially if you're picking up all what's going on for other people, whether they're verbally expressing it or you sense it, as Karen said, you really notice, gosh, there's a real change of breath, or that person was really hyper aroused in that practice. And just knowing that you're, teach from a place of steadiness, trust the process, trust the program that you're delivering, as long as it's come from a BAMBA registered teacher training organization, it's going to be good training and it's got a research base behind it. So teaching from that place of steadiness, of not non-urgency, and leaning in, knowing that you've got supervision and peer support is a real strength, so sometimes if I'm teaching and I'm finding it tricky, or I'm like, gosh, this material, there's something going on for me here, I absolutely know that I've got a supervisor that it helps me be steady as a mindfulness teacher, knowing that I can park that. I know how to look after myself in the moment, but I also know when I'm tipping and I need to take that to supervision and talk it through and get some more guidance or just be heard, give it a voice. So after what we might call a heavier session, having a debrief, but also giving yourself space, move your body, go out in nature, do know what you need to sustain you and take wise action around that and keep doing that. Don't teach and then not have a break and then teach and then teach and then teach, because you really need to look after yourself. It really, really matters. So I just want to end on that note, if that's okay, and hand over to Karen just to
Yeah.
formulate the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Angie. So we're going to stop recording. And so we've got just a few minutes to invite any questions that might